Good afternoon. I'm Alan Unell, and this series of videos is Healthcare Advocacy, where we address problems in the healthcare system and then take actions to try and make a better system for all of us. Before we get started, let me point out that down below in the YouTube description box is a link to the Healthcare Advocacy newsletter, which is the text for this video. It has all of the links to the scientific research and published documents and background material, as well as the actions that we describe. So let's get started. We're going to talk about older treatments for infections and reproductive health and some other topics that are sort of new scientific advances. Let's start with phage therapy because that's old, but it's new again. With the rapid development of antibiotics in the 1930s, phage therapy, now that's using viruses known as bacteriophages or phages to tackle bacterial infection, fell into oblivion. But as the current rise in antibiotic resistance is making it increasingly difficult to treat bacterial infections, phage therapy is once again sparking interest amongst physicians and scientists, although it is very complex in practice because of the vast diversity and specificity of phages. So against this backdrop, scientists from the Institut Pasteur, INSERM, the Paris Public Hospital Network, and the University Paris-Cité have developed a simple and effective new tool that recommends the best possible phage cocktail for a given patient. They did so by developing and training an artificial intelligence model capable of making a tailored selection of phages based solely on the genome of the targeted bacteria. This is so cool. The results of the research were published October 31st, 2024 in the journal Nature Microbiology, and there's a link to their report there. They pave the way for personalized phage therapies to treat antibiotic-resistant bacterial infections. And of course, there's a link to the Pasteur Institute report on it. Let's talk about Alzheimer's in a dish. I found that a rather novel phrase. Anyway, a decade ago, researchers introduced a new model for studying Alzheimer's. It's called Alzheimer's in a dish. The model uses cultures of mature brain cells suspended in a gel to recapitulate what takes place in the human brain over a 10 to 13 year period in just 6 weeks. But does the model truly produce the same changes that take place in human patients? Well, a new study at Massachusetts General Brigham, in collaboration with colleagues at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, created an algorithm to assess in an unbiased manner how well models of Alzheimer's disease mimic the function and gene expression patterns seen in patients' brains. Their results, published in Neuron, and of course there's a link to it in the newsletter, identify crucial shared pathways, confirming that Alzheimer's in a dish model can be used to assess new drugs accurately and rapidly, as well as point the way to new drug discoveries. This is just a super cool thing to do with software. Okay, let's talk about long COVID and brain fog. Several friends of mine have had long COVID, and brain fog is not unheard of. In long COVID, lower pulmonary gas exchange may be associated with impaired cognition. Lower gas exchange was also associated with lower gray matter and white matter volumes and increased cerebral blood flow. Now, about 17.6% of adults in the United States have experienced long COVID. That's an awful lot of people. Researchers from the University of Iowa in Iowa City set out to assess associations between pulmonary MRI gas exchange, structural and functional brain MRI, and cognition in long COVID patients. This is really an industrious study, and they were really clever about the way they put it together. In pulmonary gas exchange, oxygen, of course, moves from the lungs to the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide moves back from the bloodstream to the lungs. We all knew that. Now, for the study, they had 10 female and 2 male patients, and they were on average 59 years old. They had persistent dyspnea and or fatigue following the resolution of acute COVID infections. They were recruited from a post-COVID-19 clinic. Now, hyperpolarized xenon pulmonary MRI, structural and functional brain MRIs, pulmonary function tests, and cognitive tests were all acquired for these people. 129 xenon MRI allows for advanced measurements of ventilation and gas exchange, also very cool. Perceived cognitive difficulties were measured using the Patient-Reported Outcomes Measurement Information System, so that's the patient self-reporting in a standardized way, and objective cognitive performance was assessed using the National Institute of Health Toolbox version 3 cognition battery. And that's really important that they had to use an objective measure as well, because people like me figure I lose my keys and, it's Alzheimer's. Anyway, the results showed that lower pulmonary gas exchange may be associated with the cognitive dysfunction, as well as lower gray matter and white matter volumes in patients with long COVID. Additionally, the researchers observed significant relationships suggesting that increased cerebral blood flow is associated with decreased gas exchange in the long COVID patients. They published this about a week or so ago in the Radiological Society of America journal, and there's a link to it there. Okay, let's talk about reproductive rights worldwide. The other day, I was wondering, where in the world does a woman have a right to choose? So I put a link in the newsletter to a Wikipedia source article on the subject. And you know what? You should go look. It is a good article. Now, while abortions are legal, at least in certain conditions in almost all countries, these conditions vary dramatically. According to a United Nations report, and of course I have a link to the report in the newsletter, they picked up data in 2019 worldwide, and what they found was that under some circumstances, abortion is allowed in about 98% of countries in order to save a woman's life. Other commonly accepted reasons are preserving physical or mental health. Physical was 72%, mental health 69%. Incest or rape, 61%. In cases of fetal impairment, 61%. Performing an abortion because of economic or social reasons is accepted in 37% of countries, and performing an abortion only on the basis of the woman's request is allowed in 34% of the world's countries. And that includes Canada, the European Union, most European countries, and China. More and more countries are moving towards recognizing that reproductive rights are not between a government and anybody, but only between a woman and her healthcare provider, period. Let's talk about some examples. Mexico is a Catholic country. They removed the federal law banning abortion. Now, it is true that some states have restrictions, but most do not. In fact, women in the Southwest United States are traveling, I think Nuevo Leon is the place they go, for an abortion in Mexico. Got it? Now, Spain and Portugal are also Catholic countries, and they allow abortion. In fact, this is very recent, just about 5 years ago. Portugal made it legal, and here was the reason, because in a single year, 14 women died as a result of abortions performed outside of normal medical channels. And the Portuguese said, this is just unacceptable. They chose to reduce maternal mortality instead of punishing women. Of course, the United States and Poland went the other way and chose to restrict abortion. There's a real problem in our country, in the United States, getting enough people to stand up to the repressive political hacks in our government who think that it's okay to subjugate women. Now look, my wife and I live in Vancouver, Washington, and we're in Congressional District 3, and our own congressional representative, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, she favors the right to an abortion. She had an abortion. She had a Planned Parenthood clinic, but I hear precious little from her about trying to move it forward nationally in Congress and helping women nationwide. The point is that the Women's Health Protection Act would restore the right to an abortion nationwide, and it needs to be brought up for a vote in both houses of Congress. We need to remind our elected representatives that we're still watching, and you know what? Their jobs are always at stake, and I'm staking their job on how well they do on this. At this point, personally, I don't care how impossible it seems to pass because of the right-wing Republican nuts in Congress. But we need long and loud voices calling for reproductive freedom, which is equal to reproductive health, which is equal to lower maternal mortality, which equates to women as full citizens with bodily autonomy. Get on board. Here's the action. I want you to send a text message. Here it is. It's sign, S-I-G-N, space, P-Y-Q-M-A-Z. Sign, P-Y-Q-M-A-Z to 50409. That's ResistBot. And you're going to be sending an email to your congressperson and senators. Now, if you haven't done this before, ResistBot will ask you a bunch of questions to make sure it knows who your representatives are. It gets your name and address and phone number and email. Just answer the questions. If you want to call them, there's a link in the YouTube description box. You can do that, but the ResistBot thing is easier. Here's the message you're going to send. I'm your constituent, and I want you to know that the state of reproductive health in the United States is abysmal. Did you know that 34% of the world's countries offer abortion on demand? Did you know that Portugal, a Catholic country, recently made abortion legal just to cut down the maternal mortality rate? 14 women died there in 1 year due to botched illegal abortions, and the Portuguese said enough. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to stand up and say enough over and over and over again. It is high time for you to do everything in your power to restore the right to an abortion nationwide. I want to hear you publicly call for a vote on the Women's Health Protection Act over and over again until it gets passed and women are again full citizens with bodily autonomy. I hope you know how important this is to so many women in this country. They're watching you, and so am I. That's what I've got for you today. Please send this message off to Congress. Get them in gear. Anyway, down below you can like, share, subscribe. Please do that. You can also send me requests for research. I'm happy to do it for you. You can also send it in the YouTube comment box. Otherwise, you can send it personally to me at healthcareadvocacy1, that's all one word, @gmail.com. That's what I've got for you. We'll talk to you later. Have a good evening.